Hi, this is Jim Gibson with CableSupply.com, and today we're going to talk about cable. You know, there's a lot of different cables for different applications and all, but we need to talk a little bit about categories. What's going on with categories? Well, I remember years ago when they first came out with Category 3. Man, that was a godsend. That was wonderful, because before that, what we were using is we were using telephone cable for networks. And actually the first networks we were putting in using twisted pair was Apple Talk. And Apple Talk was kind of interesting. It worked only with Apple computers, obviously, back then when it first came out. I know some people are going to say, yeah, but it worked with other computers later. Yeah, I know. But when it first came out, it worked just on telephone cable. And a lot of times what you would do is just use an RJ11, and it's the same RJ11 you would use for your telephone. So one pair would be for Apple Talk, the other pair would be for your telephone system. And usually it was 3 pair that we were pulling back then to each location, and hooking up maybe 3 RJ11s, because in an RJ11 you only hook up 1 pair. You can hook up more than 1 pair, but then it becomes an RJ14 when you hook up more than 1 pair. But true definition of RJ11 is 1 pair, and that's how it all started back then. Before that, it was coax. We used to run coax everywhere, and it would be a little bit of, it was kind of interesting. Let me write out how we did coax. So we'd have, they called a bus, like this. This is logically what it looks like. So, you got a computer here, a computer here, here, it goes on and on and on. And you got little end units here, terminators. And when anyone spoke, it would go in both directions. And anyone sent a packet, let's say, it would go in both directions. And only the person that had that MAC address would actually would actually grab that information. All the other computers would ignore it. But when you actually had a cable, what you would do is you would come down the wall and then out to the computer, and it would be a little T there. And this is a coax cable now. Then it would go back into the wall, across the ceiling, down to the next computer, and it would be a little T connector there. And then it would go up, and it would go down, and it would go over, and I'm messing up my diagram. But anyway, you get the idea. That's how it would do it. You had to go up and down, loop down, and it really was tedious. And it used BNC connectors and things like that. It wasn't an F connector like you find on your cable at your house. But it was a wonderful thing when they started coming out with twisted pair. And I remember the first time we went beyond an Apple Talk, it was called a David network, and it was actually a hub that we took telephone wire to each computer and we plugged it into a hub, and it worked great, and that was fantastic. And then they came out with Category 3, and they started coming out with hubs. And if you watch my other videos, you never want to put a hub in your network today, because it really slows you down. I mean, it's wonderful compared to the old coax system, but it's nowhere near as good as the switches that you have today and the speed that the switches add to the network, and because of their design and how they work. Hubs slowed everyone down. Now it was better again than the coax, but it slowed everyone down. So what came out after Category 3? People talk about 4. I never saw a Category 4, so it didn't. If it came out, it didn't last very long. I never think I even touched a Category 4. But they came out with Category 5, and 5 was a lot faster. See, as you go up in the categories, they go faster. So 5 is faster than 3. 5E is faster than 5, and then it continues to go up. And today, pretty much the standard is 6. So what you see on Category 6 today is pretty much the standard. And what's interesting about the different categories in cable is when they first came out, they're real expensive. So now 6A is just starting to come out, and that's pretty pricey. 6 is, it costs more than 5E, but it does more than 5E. It's a faster speed. But 5E, when it first came out, it was really pricey also. So the prices will be high, and then as everyone starts to adapt that standard, the prices go down and down and down. So you'll see that over time that the price will drop. Now a lot of people say, well, what category should I cable my house with or my business with? And this is the rule of thumb I use for today, okay? It will change a year from now or 2 years from now. But today, the rule of thumb is if you're going to be in that building for longer than 5 years, 4 to 5 years, then you should have category 6. Everyone's moving to category 6. So use category 6 cable. If you're just going to be there for a year and you want to save some money, 5E is fine. But remember, it costs just as much labor to put in category 5E as it does category 6 or 6A. So keep that in mind when you're cabling. You're not going to save on the labor. You may save a little bit on the cable, but not necessarily on the labor. It takes the same amount of time to put in a 5E as it does to put in a 6. And so if I was advising someone today, I'd say put in a 6. Put in category 6 today. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now or whatever, it would be 6A or even higher at that point. But we're just going to go over some of the practical applications that you need to know when it comes to cabling. And the two distinguishing things, rather than just 5E and 6, the other distinguishing thing you need to know is plenum rated cable and non-plenum rated cable. First, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what is a plenum ceiling compared to a non-plenum ceiling, because that's going to matter now, because you got to buy the cable that fits the type of ceiling you have and type of plenum you have. So let's take a look. Now I want you to think that as you're looking at my diagram I'm going to draw, that you're out on the street and you're looking into the building and there's no face on the front of the building, okay? So you're actually looking in. You got x-ray eyes. You're going to go right past that front of the building and you're going to look at the construction of the building, because that's what plenum is. It deals with the construction and how they put in the air conditioning heating unit. So let's start here. I'm going to draw the building that you're looking at. Okay, and there's the building. Okay, and then what you have is you have a drop ceiling. And most people in businesses, commercial settings, has the drop ceilings. In homes, you rarely see drop ceiling. It really seems out of place when you do see one. It just doesn't fit. And then, of course, on top of the building, if you're able to look up there, most of the time in commercial settings, that's where the air conditioning and heating unit is. It sits on top of the roof. Sometimes on the outside. It's not like a home air conditioner. And when I grew up in Philly, everybody had not everybody, but people that could afford it had an air conditioning that sat in the window. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about commercial setting, okay? And I didn't have air conditioning when I was a kid, and it's humid in Philly. But anyway, let's look at the plenum rated first. Plenum rated ceiling. What you're going to have is you're going to have an intake and an exhaust on that air conditioning and heating unit. So it's going to be, even though it sits on the ceiling, it's going to be connected through the roof into the top of the building. And so what you have here is you have ducts. And in this case, you're going to have one duct, because this is I'm going to show you a plenum rated ceiling, okay? This is called the plenum right here. This is the big plenum right there. So what's going to happen is the air, I'm going to use this red one, the air, by the air conditioner, is going to suck air through here. And so the air is going to go up, and then it's going to go through here, and it's going to go all through the plenum area, and then into the air conditioning heating unit. And then it's going to be conditioned, either heat or cold, and it's going to be sent back into the human area. Here, I'm going to draw a human here. So there's your human. Big smile on the face. You can tell from the 70s, that's a smiley face. Anyway, so this is where the air goes, and this is called a plenum here. And this is how you have to buy that special cable that runs up here. So if you have cable up here running, I don't know if you can see this green on the camera, but let's say you got a jack here, right? And the cable goes up the wall, and then it goes through the ceiling, and it goes over here to the data room, right? Well, going through the ceiling here, it's going through the plenum. So anytime cable goes through a plenum, you had to have specially rated cable. So why is it called plenum rated? Well, what happens is all cable burns, okay? But plenum rated cable is fire resistant to a point, but actually it produces less smoke, and the smoke that it produces is not as poisonous as plenum rated cable. So in this case, this protects the occupants if there's a small fire in the plenum and they're breathing, or the firemen come in when there's a fire and there's a fire up here in the plenum area, or the building's on fire and they're walking through and have to breathe all that. You want to be able to protect them from the bad odors, the bad gases that come off the cable as it burns. You know, it's kind of interesting. When I was a kid, we used to take the straws and we'd light them, and they were PVC straws. And as we lit them, they'd light on fire, and they would drip. And as they dripped, they would make weird noises. They'd go zip, zip, zip. And the smoke would be billowing off there. I didn't realize that smoke was so noxious and bad for you. But at any rate, that cable that goes up in a plenum has to be plenum rated. So what is non-plenum? What does a non-plenum rated cable, ceiling look like? And I'm going to explain that right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to show. And that is, it has a duct there. And so the air is sucked up here, and it goes through here, and it's ducked back. So it's kind of easy. You know, if you're a cabler, you're going to have a ladder. So what you do is you get into the building, you pop the ceiling tile, and you're looking for the intake and the exhaust from the AC. And if there's only one tube coming down, then you have a plenum rated ceiling. If there's two tubes coming down, this one and that one, then you have a non-plenum rated ceiling. And that means you can run PVC, or what they call CMR, riser cable. You can run that riser cable up here. It's less expensive. It's absolutely safe. It's absolutely according to code. There's not a problem there. So you want to know this because there's a difference between riser cable and plenum rated cable when it comes to price. So why is it important? Well, plenum rated cable is probably twice as expensive as non-plenum cable. And the difference between the two is only in the coating. So let me show you what I mean by that. Then we're going to talk about some other types of cable. So, and by the way, these things are really inexpensive wire strippers. They're my favorite, man. You just spin them. And on plenum and non-plenum cable, the metal is exactly the same. The twists are exactly the same. And it's the twists that determine the category. So there's no difference in the electrical connections of a plenum rated cable compared to what they call a riser cable, or a non-plenum, or a CMR cable. So it's the electrical, you're not getting an electrical advantage by buying the plenum rated cable. It's just costing more. And so if you don't need plenum rated cable, you don't buy it. Now this is the part that has the coating that makes the difference. What type of coating on this do you have? If you have plenum rated, this is special. This is where the cost comes in. It's not in the electrical side, it's in the coating side. So you have this little coating here, and that's the thing that's going to catch on fire, is the coating. So if you're in a plenum rated ceiling, you got to have plenum rated coating. It's kind of a fire retardant, but it's also low smoke, and the smoke it gives off is not as poisonous as the PVC or riser. Now, so a lot of people, I hear people say that, you know, I want plenum rated cable because it's better cable. It's the same cable. If it's Cat 5e plenum and it's Cat 5e non-plenum, it's the same interior. It's the same twisted pairs. Now the difference is, if you want a higher quality cable, then you go to category 6. And what happens in category 6 is the twist is a lot tighter. And there's reasons for that, engineering reasons, and that would take another half hour to explain. but the twists are tighter. There is a difference between the two. And you always have to make sure that you're buying the right cable. So my advice to you is, if it's not a plenum rated cable, don't get plenum rated. Now there is one exception to that. There's some people who have gone absolutely crazy, some legislators and people who set the code, and they require plenum everywhere. Plenum rated cable in this, plenum rated cable in that. And in some cases you have a non-plenum rated ceiling where you're going to need that plenum cable because of code. And sometimes they check it. They go out and it says right on the cable whether it's plenum rated or it's not plenum rated. And guess what? You put a non-plenum rated cable and that code enforcement guy comes out and he looks at your cable and it's non-plenum rated and it's supposed to be plenum rated, it's going to come out of the ceiling. Now in some cases we have codes where you can use non-plenum cable on the first floor, but you have to have plenum for every floor from there on out above that. So you have to know the local code and what's going on. But remember, plenum and rated cable and what they call CMR, riser cable or PVC cable, the other cable, is electrically absolutely fine. The difference, or absolutely the same. The difference in the cable is in the twists, and that's what gives you the categories, is the twists and the separations of each pair. So if you go into, let's see, here's a Cat 6 cable. I'm going to cut it open. You're going to see that it has a separator in there. Usually a Cat 6 cable is going to cost more. Obviously it's going to cost more, but it's also going to weigh more. So I don't know if you can see that, but remember, when you're dealing with computer cable, you're always dealing with 4 pairs. People, sometimes I hear them say, well, it's 8 wire. Yeah, it's 8 wire, but the tradition in cabling is that it's called pairs, and they're always the same color code. So you always have blue, orange, green, brown, and actually there's one other one after that called slate, but since this is a 4 pair, not a 5, I don't know if you can even buy a 5 pair. This is what it looks like. Now this is a separator, and it has a little twist in it. So not only are the wires twisted tighter, which means there's a lot more copper in category 6 because there's more twists, and you're going to see it's going to weigh more, but also the pairs themselves within the cable are twisted, and you have this little separator in here that separates them. So whether it's PVC or whether it's plenum rated, it's going to be the same inside. And a lot of people say, well, you know, that string, what is that string for? And I hear some people say, well, you know, I add strength to the cable. This has nothing to do with strength. This is how you strip it. You see, you pull that down, and the cable shielding, the outside shielding is cut, and that's what you use it for. And then you take this and you cut it right there, you know, and then you, whatever. You should never have this long of a thing when you punch down, by the way. I'm just doing it for example. You want to keep that twist as close as possible to your punch down. And there's some other videos about punch down tools. You know, if you're only doing one or two jacks or something in your home, this tool will do your punch down, and there's a video on this. Of course, I always carry this anyway because I really like that stripper. That is really nifty, really works great for me, and it's fast. So let's move on with some of the other cables. So if you look at a cable, the front of the box, it's going to tell you what it is. And you know what's strange is just about every cable I know of, I don't know anything it's not made in China, because the coating of the cable itself is chemicals. It's a mineral that's found in China, and so most of the manufacturing of these cables is done in China. But let's take a look at the front. It will tell you pretty much what it is in the front. You know, category 6, it says E. I don't know how enhanced it is, but you do have 6A. That is a category. That is a standard, and that stands for augmented. Okay, so you have 5E, you know, category 5 enhanced. I don't think 6E is nothing more than a sales, look, we're different than everyone else. As long as it's 6, and in this case it's plenum, so you're going to see CMP, and the P stands for plenum. If it said CMR, it's going to be a riser cable, and that's your PVC cable, and it's going to weigh the same. Category 6 is going to weigh the same as another Category 6 box, but if it's Category 5, there's less twists, so it's going to remain a lot different. Now, here's this beat-up box that one of my guys brought back from a cabling job. They weren't done, and the way I handle these is they put the footage on it. I don't put the footage on it. After you've been doing this for years and years and years, you can lift up the cable and you know the category, and you pretty much know how much is left. And we get to a point to where we hit 100 feet, we don't pull the cable anymore, because the most expensive cable in the world is the one that you pulled to the location you wanted to go to, and then it's 1 foot too short, and then you got to start all over again. So we pretty much, once it hits 100 foot, we're not going to be pulling anymore. We're not going to use that box anymore. It's scrap cable. And remember, the labor is more expensive than the cable. So if you're cabling and you're worrying about every little foot, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to pull enough cable when it comes out of the wall. It's going to be difficult to deal with. It's going to take you more labor, more time, and it's just not worth it. On the cable itself, it will read what it is. So in this case, it's plenum rated, right? And where does it say category? Where does it say category? It says it's somewhere on here. Oh, Cat 6, right there. But on the cable itself, it's going to say Cat 6 UTP, in this case, 4-pair, 23 gauge CMP, and it's going to give the footage also, and that's where you get the footage. I don't know why you write it on the box. I don't know why you care about the footage, to be honest with you. As long as you have 100 feet, more than 100 feet, you should be doing okay. For a pull. Now, let's talk about that, because it's 100 meters, okay, and 100 meters is, I think, 326 feet. So do you pull a cable 326 feet? It's rare. The average cable is between 100 and 150 feet. But if you got a really long pull, in my opinion, my experience in cabling buildings and all over the years, is that you try to keep it under 300 feet, because that limit in according to standards, you can't have the cable more than 100 meters, or else you start having some issues with the system itself. Can you go over 100 meters? Yeah, I've heard people that done it and they don't have a problem. But the standard is, if you want it to certify, if you want to say, yes, I did a Cat 6 or a Cat 5e installation, then it has to be under 100 meters, which is around 300 feet. Now, the reason why I keep it at 300 feet is you also have to take into consideration the patch cord from the wall to your computer, the patch cord from your patch panel to your switch. So they're going to add footage to it. You do want to stay within the standard. The standard works. Okay, so design your system that if it's further than 300 feet, then you're going to have to put an intermediate distribution frame there. I'll tell you, we won a big job one time, and I'll show you how we did it. There was a big nationally known company that uses 3 letters. I'll never say what it is, but they designed a system that was not workable. And the data center was over here, and they had cubes all along the walls here and all throughout the system. It's a pretty big install, probably about 1,500 locations. And they had everything going straight back from each cube all the way to here, and we were looking at the floor plan, and we realized that that was like 380 feet, and it would not work. So we came in with a different setup where they definitely wanted that. I remember that they wanted that data center here, not in the middle. I would have put it in the middle. So what we did is we came up with an IDF, intermediate distribution frame. This is an MDF, and this is an IDF. And what you do is you run your cables to the IDF, and let's say that's 75 feet, and then you run, you put a switch here and patch panels and everything else, and we run off the switch, and that turned out to be, you know, maybe 200 feet back to the data center. And I think we had these, and we ran as many cables as we can, the shortest path, and then we did a trunk from one end to another. A trunk is a term used to connect two similar systems together, two switches together, and that comes from the voice world. Years ago, when you had voice equipment and you connected the two together, then it was considered a trunk line. So we ran trunks back to the data center from each of those. And when the customer asked why our design was different than that company that's well known throughout the world, we pointed out that their design was flawed and wouldn't work because it broke all the standards. Remember, 100 meters, you want to keep it around less than 300 feet for it to be within the standard. And that's how we did it. So, you know, if it's over 300 feet, then you're going to have to put an IDF somewhere. Actually, the design was not a good design to start with, but that was their requirement, not ours. You always do what the customer wants you to do unless it's illegal or unethical. I would have put the data center somewhere right in the middle of this oblong building, like this, and then everything could have went right to the MDF, but that's not what they wanted. So we do what they want, and we got the project, did it, and it all worked, and everybody was happy, and I got paid. So that makes me happy. But remember your maximum footage. Now there's other cables that you have to be aware of. So this is called IW. All this Cat 5e, Cat 6, Cat 3. No one buys Cat 3 anymore. I mean, it's so cheap. Cat 5e is so inexpensive. I don't even know what the price of Cat 3 is. I don't know if anyone even manufactures it. And I don't know of any application except for maybe old telephone systems that could actually use that. Remember, you can always go, if your requirement is 5e and you put in 6, that's absolutely fine. But you can't go the other way. So you can't, if your requirement is 6 and you put in 5e, that won't work. Okay, so will category 6 work on old traditional telephones? Yeah, it will work fine. There's no problem at all. And phones had a longer distance. Sometimes they can go up to 1,000 foot. But the bottom line is, when you're dealing with computer systems, you can always move the category higher but never lower than what's required by the customer. So you have different requirements there, different things, but everything we talked about building cable inside a building. So that the old term for that is IW, inside wire. It's different than outside wire, because if you run this cable, this type of cable, through outside wire, I mean, it looks great. I mean, you can even get green cable, I guess, to blend in with the green grass or whatever. But what's going to happen is, after about 2 years, this outside thing, this outside coating that we're talking about, no matter what it is, plenum or any other type of coating, the UV light is going to break it down, and you're going to see it's going to have all sorts of cracks in it, and when you touch it, it's going to fall apart. So if you're going to do cable on the outside of a building, sometimes people have unique ways of putting in cable. They can't get down a wall, so they go through the wall outside and bring it down and bring it back in. I've seen that, and it works, especially with homes, where once you put that drywall up, you can't get behind that wall without causing damage or without difficulties. But when the UV light hits it, it's going to destroy that cable after a couple of years. You're going to have to rerun it. So a specialty cable is a UV cable, and you need that. Now, if you take this cable, just normal IW, and you bury it under the ground, you're going to have problems after a couple of years too, because it may develop some cracks in it, and water gets in there, you're going to have some issues. So they have what's called direct burial cable. And direct burial cable has this jelly stuff in it. It's usually clear jelly, but it's really sticky. And when you put it in, what happens is you're punching this down, and you got to clean the jelly off the end when you're finally going to have to terminate it. And when you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to get the stuff all over your hands, and then if you're working in an area that has a lot of dust, you're going to see all that dust sticking to your hands. and it looks like you have fur gloves on. And usually the technicians call it icky picky, you know, because it's like, oh gosh, I got to work with that today, and I'm not near a place where I can wash my hands. But you got to pick it apart, and everything sticks, and it's a mess. But the nice thing about the gel filled is if there is a break in the cable somewhere, or a break develops, that gel won't allow water to come in because it's water resistant. So, you know, you pour water in this gel and it just washes off. So it protects the cable, the inside the cable. And so that's a different type of cable. Now, some people say, well, you know, I'm going to put it in conduit, and I'm going to use inside wire, and I'm going to put it in conduit. You know, it's just not going to work. And that's fine. You can do it. It may last longer than just direct burying a IW cable. But what happens is that when you get some water in that conduit, you're going to have some problems. You know, interesting story, a few years back when I worked for a big corporation that had multiple locations throughout the U.S., and we were installing systems all over the U.S. This is many, many years ago. We usually, it was an air freight company, and usually what we did is we installed either a system on airport premises or directly thereafter, or somewhere after or outside the airport. So I was trying to arrange for a contractor to cable a building on the airport for me, and it was a cargo facility, and it needed some cabling. And I said, I was talking to the engineers there at the airport, and I'd said what type of cable we were going to use, everything else, and he said, oh, you can't do that, you got to put conduit in. And conduit, of course, is that metal tubing that you see all the time. It's not necessary for low voltage because there's nothing in low voltage that can start a fire in of itself. It's just low voltage DC current. That's all there is to it. There's nothing in there. It won't hurt you. You can cut the cable, strip it, and hold it in your hand. It's not going to hurt you. It's not like 110 current that can actually start a fire if it starts arcing. So I said, well, you don't really need the conduit running from every single jack back to the phone room, back to the MDF, every single one. I said, man, that could be really a nightmare. It could be pricey too. I said, you know, if it's a plenum ceiling, we'll just put plenum rated cable in. And the guy said, well, that's our rules on the airport. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. I said, but I will go ahead and I'll ask my contractor if he can put it in. And he said, oh, no, you can't do that. We only have one approved electrician that can put in conduit. And I said, okay, this is getting ridiculous. Can I get the name of the board president who runs the airport, and maybe I could talk to him about this? And he said, well, he's the guy who owns the electric company that's the only one allowed to put the conduit in this airport. And so we had to put conduit, or we had to pay the board member who ran the airport to run all this silly conduit all throughout the whole building so we could be in business at the time frame that we needed. So if you have plenum rated cable, you don't need it in conduit. If you're going to direct burial a cable, you don't need conduit. Now, is it nice to put direct burial in a conduit? Yeah, that's double insurance. Now, the next thing is overhead cable. If you're running from one building to another, an overhead cable, that's a special type of cable also. It's very light, by the way. Even though it looks thick and it's usually black, it's UV protected, and it's not very flexible like this cable. It's very stiff, and it's about 3 times as thick as this cable. But it's a very standardized or unique cable for hanging, and telephone company and uses it a lot. You'll see it between poles and everything else, and it's a special cable. The last cable I want to talk about is coaxial cable, sometimes referenced as coax, and it's a little stiffer and things like that. And actually, if you look at it on a coax cable, let me see if I can strip a little end here. These strippers are great, by the way. This is what I use all the time when dealing with coax. It has a little gauge there. It will strip it to the right length that you need to put your end on. And this is going to be an F connector. Has a little arrow on it that tells you which way to spin it. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's making noise as I spin it. It's cutting through the outer shell at one point. I just keep on spinning until it gets easy to spin. And by now it's pretty easy. And it's going to give me stages of cuts, if I can get to it. And if you see, there's a little bit of shielding there. We've got a couple types of shielding here. We have like aluminum foil, and we have some braiding. But it cuts it exactly the length you need to put your F connector on the end. And I have all sorts of shielding down here. But this thing is all shielded on the outside. And that's how it gets its name about coaxial. And what it means is the axes, electronic axes, are both centered. So if you look at the cable straight on this way, what it's going to look like, I'm going to draw something big here. So I'm going to blow it up a little bit. It's going to look like that. And both of them have the same, what you call axle. Both have the same electrical center. So the outside, which is grounded, is going to have the same center electrically as the center element does. And so that's all you have. It's pretty much like a one pair cable. You have the outside, which is going to be grounded, and then you have the inside that has the signal. And that's what's used in your homes for cable TV, things like that. You're going to have a lot of this. And of course, it comes also PVC and plenum rated, things like that. Now, there's another form of cable that's used in buildings, and that is an IW cable, inside wire cable, and that's called STP. So we've been dealing with UTP. So we've been dealing with UTP, unshielded twisted pair. This is shielded twisted pair. So both of them have category 6 and category 5E and whatever else. So they both have the same category. The cable inside is exactly the same. The twist of the cable is exactly the same. It has the same electrical characteristics. But what happens is there's a shielding around the cable that you're supposed to ground, by the way. And you should use a shielded patch panel, and you should use shielded jacks and shielded patch cords and everything else if you have a necessity for shielded cable. It's very rare you need shielded cable. If you have a lot of electrical interference in the area, let's say you're right next to an AM broadcast station next door and they're broadcasting 100 million watts every day and proud of it, if you do not have shielding on your cable, you're going to pick up some of that transmit power. But that's the only time I could think of it. Maybe if you're the government agency and you want to shield and make sure no electrical information is leaving the cable, that's when you would use shielded twisted pair. Shielded twisted pair and unshielded twisted pair, it doesn't affect the categories. It will affect the price. This is a lot pricier, a lot more labor involved in putting this in, and at the same time, not really necessary unless you have an application. I knew one customer we dealt with, it's a national customer, and we put in their cable all over the United States, and they just required that it had to be shielded. I have no idea why. Someone told the guy in charge of IT that somehow that was the best cable in the world to have shielded cable. Well, it's a customer, so if it wasn't unethical or illegal or anything else, then we put in shielded cable, and that's what we did. We put in shielded cable for the customer. Of course, at the same time, they didn't want a shielded patch panel, so I don't understand what they were doing. But you gotta ground that shielding for it to work properly, and so you have an extra ground involved. And we do have testers that test both UTP and pinout testers and STP, and it will test that shielding around the cable to make sure that it has continuity from one end to the other. So I can't think of any other cables. I mean, there's a lot more, don't get me wrong. You got a lot of specialty cable out there. Maybe what we'll talk about is solid cable compared to stranded. When do you need stranded, when do you need solid? Well, if you're going to cable behind walls, things like that, it's always going to be solid cable. The only time you're going to need stranded cable is when you have a patch cord. So patch cords, because they bend a lot, you know, you're bending them, everything else, and you're constantly moving them and everything else. That stranded cable has many strands in it rather than just one filament. It has a lot of strands in it. That's going to give you the ability to make it flex very easily. let's see, there's other characteristics about stranded cable than there is about just regular one pair, and it deals with physics about the bending and everything else. But you don't want a stranded cable for your jacks, for your patch panels, things like that. They're always just used on your patch cords. That's where you use stranded. I had someone call up and they wanted to order like 10,000 feet of stranded cable. We don't stock stranded cable unless it's for speakers or something like that, and of course in patch cords. They're standard in patch cords. You don't want solid in patch cords. There's too much bending. You bend wire too much, you know what happens? It breaks. With stranded, it doesn't break as easily. You can keep on bending and bending, and you have a lot more resistance to breakage. And there's a reason for it for another video. Makes a lot of sense. But I think I covered just about everything. Remember, if you're going to do direct burial, you better get permission from the authorities in the area, so you don't end up breaking a gas line. They will come out and help you for free, and most government agencies will. They will tell you where the gas lines are, and you got to have permits and everything else to do that. So that's totally different than what we do. The last thing is there is specialty cables. There's vampire cables, things like that. There's other types of specialty cables. We do have them at Cable Supply. But on the specialty cables, the ones where we have to cut the cable, once we cut it for you, it's yours. I had one guy where we sold him 100 foot of cable, and he sent back 20 feet and asked for a refund on the 20 feet. Once that cable's cut, you own it. And the reason why is usually we have a 1,000-foot reel, and we cut pieces off it according to what people require if they're specialty cable, like a lot of direct burial. So if you're measuring at the footage from one building to another, and you come back with it's going to be 100 feet, well, then you got to remember that it has to go in the building and up a wall and down somewhere and attach to somewhere, so you got to add the extra footage. And then you really should add about 20% more to it, just to make sure you have enough cable. You run into a rock or something like that, or a big boulder you have to go around. You don't want to shortchange your cable, make it too short. Remember, the most expensive cable in the world is one that's 1 inch, 1 foot too short, because you put all that labor in and it didn't quite work. So in other videos we'll talk about how to cable a building and why you want to run excess cable in certain areas. And it does make a lot of sense after you've done this a million times to do it a certain way. There's certain ways to do it and it makes sense. That's all there is to it. So this has been a long video. I do appreciate you hanging in for the whole thing. And thank you for watching the video. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you think I missed something or should have done it a different way, I'm always happy to get comments. Most of them I post, especially those that don't have profanity. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, and thank you for watching. Again, this is Jim Gibson with CableSupply.com, and hope you have a great day. Hi, this is Jim with CableSupply.com. Hi, this is Jim from CableSupply.com. Hi, this is Jim with CableSupply.com, and today I'm going to show you how to cut a hole in the drywall.
This is David signing out. You stay classy, Internet.